Hey everybody, welcome to the briefing room. I'm Devin Dwyer in the Washington Bureau of ABC News. Great to have you with us on this Monday. We hope you had a good weekend. Today on the show, we're tackling the tough questions that have been left behind in the wakes of those two massacres over the weekend. The death toll continues to climb in these two shootings, two communities terrorized in just a matter of 13 hours. Both had very different shooters, very different motives, but one thing in common, both used guns and were motivated by hate. In the next few minutes, we will take a look at the calls to action today and ask the question whether any action can come and will come from this latest tragedy. The president said today it's time to act with resolve, but we will see whether or not he or others will show leadership. We'll also hear in this hour on a special edition of the briefing room from several stakeholders from across the country who have experienced this violence. We hope that you will also join in this conversation. Please add your thoughts on our ABC News Live Facebook page as we continue through this hour. We want you to be part of this conversation as well. But we begin in El Paso, Texas, with the latest on the community struggling to cope and come to grips with the events there. Our Will Carr has been on the ground. Will, and just in the past couple of hours, the death toll has climbed. 2 more people have succumbed to their injuries today.
That's right. Sadly, Devin, just a short time ago, we learned that the 22nd victim died from this tragedy. His name was Juan Velasquez. He was 78 years old. He and his wife were going into the Walmart that is just down the street from us, just like they went in every single week. They were running an errand when their family members tell us they were confronted by that gunman in the parking lot. Both were shot and both were rushed here to the hospital where their family has been here around the clock, hoping for the best. And sadly, Juan Velasquez just passed away. I spoke to his son just a short time after he found out that his dad died. Take a listen to what he had to say.
The message is to do something about this. I mean, it's happening everywhere. It happened after this. It happened in Ohio. It's happening in Chicago. It's happening everywhere. I mean, we got to stop this. We got to come up with some kind of law, gun law, something. I mean, something that's going to keep avoiding all this. We don't want to be scared.
His son told me that after his family was attacked, it feels like Hispanics are being hunted. If there's any good news here, is that his mom is still in this hospital, and we're told that she's doing all right. She's expected to recover. This has had a big impact on first responders as well as the people working in the hospitals across this city. We've had several emotional interactions with doctors and with administrative staff that work at these hospitals, and they've just talked about trying to break the news to family members when this death toll continues to go up, and they've been working around the clock. They have just seen the worst. We're talking about war zone type wounds, Devin, and it has been a rough couple of days for this city. Devin.
Yeah, it sure has. Will Carr, thank you so much there. The death toll in El Paso now at 22. The suspect, we should say, is in custody there. Investigators talking to him today. Let's go now to Dayton, Ohio, where that community is struggling to come to grips with the shooting there. Early Sunday morning, 9 people have died. Our Alex Perez is there on the scene. He's been talking to members of that community. Alex, give us the state of play right now, and is there any clearer picture yet on the motive in this shooting?
Well, Devin, I think you said it best. People here are just struggling right now to still make sense of all of this. Unfortunately, investigators at this point say they have not found a clear motive in this case. Now, one of the victims that survived, one of the 11 people still hospitalized, authorities say one of those people actually arrived here to this entertainment district with the shooter, the gunman, and the gunman's sister. So they're talking to that one victim who's in the hospital right now, hoping he might be able to shed some more light on what exactly was the motivation here. They say at this point they do not believe that bias was a motive, but they warn that it's unclear right now. They're still in the middle of this investigation. Now, this is a busy entertainment district. There are bars, clubs, restaurants on both sides of the street. Here, usually a lot of laughs, but the last few days here, this has become a memorial site. I want you to take a look behind me here. We're outside Ned Pepper's bar, and you can see this just continues to grow. Just in the last several hours here today, there are flowers, candles, stuffed animals, balloons, and in this area, and if you walk down the street, you see it in other areas as well. People just coming down here trying to express their sorrow and trying to pay their respect for those 9 people who were killed here. Now, this all happened very quickly. According to investigators, the gunman, 24-year-old Connor Betts, came walking down this street, 5th Street here in Dayton, Ohio, and opened fire. Authorities say within 30 seconds they were able to confront him and shoot and kill the gunman. He ended up stopping right in front of this door here outside Ned Pepper's bar. Authorities say had he gotten inside this bar behind those doors, it was a packed night in there, and there would have been a lot more fatalities. They say they're very lucky they were able to stop him as quickly as they did. Devin?
Yeah, a lot of praise for the first responders in Ohio today, Alex. Well deserved at that. Thank you so much for that reporting. We go now to Alexandria Lark. She was a witness of the shooting just outside Ned Potter's bar where Alex Perez was standing. She survived the incident early Sunday morning. Alexandria, thank you so much for joining us. It must have been an incredibly horrifying and traumatic experience. How are you feeling a day later?
I'm doing a lot better now that I'm at home with my kids and my husband. It's still shocking.
I bet it sure is. As you process that night and have heard a little bit about your story, you actually came into pretty close contact with the shooter. What stands out in your mind when you think back about that moment?
What stands out the most is just as you're in line waiting to go into the bar, you hear shots, you drop, you turn around, you see a person less than about 2 inches away from you get shot. As you and your friends start running and you're screaming for them, we run literally just about 2 feet into the door, and we look back and the shooter's just at the door. And as everyone's climbing over each other, just trying to get to the back door, you just hear another shot. And then you hear shots and then shots, and you look back and he's on the ground. Your first thought is he getting back up? Is he still going to shoot? Just keep running. And in that moment, it was just complete panic.
Was he saying anything as he was coming at you?
No, it was no words said at all. Just all black gear for mask, the gun. And as soon as you look down and you see gun and person in black gear, your first instinct is just run. You don't even think of what's going on. You just panic.
You no doubt saw what happened in El Paso, Texas, just a few hours before you went out to the bar there in the Oregon district. So many places have been impacted by this. Obviously, what do you think communities like yours need to do now in response to this? Do you have kind of an early gut sense about what should be done?
Only thing I could say is to pray for those that were lost, because their loss is a real tragedy. We just need to band together and figure out ways to make it safer, because no one wants to go out just to think they're going to have fun and end up shot or running for their life, and that they're not going to make it home to see their loved ones. It's the last thing you want on your mind. It's even with schools, daycares, anywhere. Like, there has to be some way to make it safer, something. As a mom, it doesn't sit right to me.
And it doesn't sit right to many of us. Alexandria Lark, we're glad you're home. We're glad you're okay. And we know it's going to take some time to recover from all of this in your community. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Well, a lot of people in El Paso are coping with that shock and grief as well. Our reporter Lizette Rodriguez caught up with 2 sisters whose stepfather was inside the Walmart when the shooting began there early Saturday morning, and they told us about their experience. Take a listen.
This is my home, and it hurts a lot. He took so many innocent lives. And my stepdad was in there. I felt so bad. I thought I was gonna lose him. I was terrified, and it's sad knowing that this happened. Like, it breaks my heart, honestly. El Paso's strong. We're a strong community, and we help each other. I think we will get through this. Like, we will. We're very strong people that help one another, and we will get through this.
That shooting in El Paso has put the spotlight on the impact on the Hispanic community. The shooter allegedly telling his targets that he was out to kill Hispanics, to kill Mexicans. As we heard in our report from Will Carr in El Paso, he caught up with the son of one of the victims in that Walmart, Alvaro Mena, who told us how he and his family are responding today and what they think the community is feeling right now.
You're not safe anywhere, but this is the safest place. We never thought it would happen here. But I'm from Colorado. I mean, it happened over there. You guys know what's happening in Colorado, but it's just everywhere now. That's my message. Just come up with some law or something that we can't be doing this. I mean, we're afraid to go out to Walmart. We're afraid to go out to the street because we feel like we're being hunted. I mean, because our color, our skin color.
Gosh, feel like we're being hunted because of the color of our skin. That's the sentiment right now in the Latino community, especially in El Paso, Texas. I want to bring in someone who's very plugged in with that community now. Angel Gomez is the co-founder of Operation Hope. It's a charity organization in that community. They do some great work. It stands for helping other people endure. Angel, thanks so much. Great to see you. You founded this group in 2009 to help your community, to make a difference there in El Paso. How are you feeling today? It sounds like this community has taken one heck of a gut punch.
You know, as a community, we're coming together, my good friend, and it is so nice to see everybody from the funeral homes, even people that have flower shops that are coming in. They're donating the casket spreads for the people. It's just a phenomenal way, the way we are standing together as a united El Paso.
Yeah, your organization, Angel, is a pretty impressive one. You've been around for 10 years. Neighbor helping neighbor there. We've heard it over and over again the past 24 hours. I understand you're mobilizing support. You alluded to it there, but to help with some of the funerals, to help with the families of the survivors?
Yes, sir. As far as we know right now, we have a count of 22 victims, and we will be providing their funeral services, not only in the El Paso area, sir, but we're going to be sending the bodies after they get embalmed. We're going to be sending them to Juarez. I know Torreon, Mexico is another one that we had some people from Torreon that are visiting, and of course from Chihuahua.
Wow.
And this is all done at no cost for the families, my good friend, none whatsoever. This is just the way El Paso, as they say, this is how El Paso rolls, as one. We are one community. This gentleman had to come out from 600 some odd miles away to come and do this tragic stuff here in the El Paso area, and that's not El Paso.
Yeah, it sure is not. You, Angel, had a good friend. Chris Grants, I understand, was a friend of yours who was inside the Walmart, was shot, has been in the ICU.
Yes,
do you have an update on how he's doing right now?
Believe this or not, the gentleman is doing a lot better. They took him off his ventilator this morning, and he was shot on the right side. He had 2 broken ribs. His liver was slashed with a bullet. He lost a kidney, we know that, but he is still hanging on. He's doing good, and I hope he will be getting out of the ICU later on today because he is doing so well. Honestly, considering what he went through, he's doing well.
I'm so glad to hear that. Angel Gomez with Operation Hope, before we let you go, a lot of people watching this, a lot of people want to know around the country, what can we do to help? Is there anything that El Paso needs, anything that people can do to send support?
Just don't be afraid. El Paso has been one of the safest cities in the country. Don't be afraid to come down and visit us down here, man. We'll show you a good time. There, people are lovable. We don't like to really shake hands that much. We like to hug people. Come on down. Say your prayers to El Paso, and like any nonprofit organization, if they care to make a donation, we'll all accept it, because one of the things the funeral homes will do is provide the caskets, the embalming and stuff for the victims, but what we need to find for them is the cemeteries that we have to go and actually do the burials and that. But that's going to be something that we're going to be tackling later on today, as well as through tomorrow, because we understand the families have already, the victims have been released, and they're going to start making funeral arrangements pretty soon.
Angel Gomez, co-founder of Operation Hope, pretty inspiring spirit in the wake of everything that you guys have gone through. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for your message. Thanks for your good work, sir. And we should say, as we end out this block, that the government of Mexico is also reacting right now to the tragedy in El Paso. They say they are contacting the United States government to support those families. Some Mexican nationals were killed as well. Stay with us here on ABC News Live. Special edition of the Briefing Room. We'll be back right after this.
ABC News, straightforward.
What's the most innovative daily news podcast out there to listen to every day? Well, the Edward R. Murrow Awards say it's Start Here, the daily news podcast from ABC News. Even the New York Times calls us a top news podcast worth listening to. So if you like getting behind the biggest news stories of the day, inside all the details, the backstory, and what will happen next, then listen to Start Here, the daily news podcast from ABC News. It's like no other news podcast out there. Even the critics agree. Listen free on Apple Podcasts.
This is what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live, the 24/7 streaming news source from ABC News. Breaking news, live events, streaming nonstop. Original breakthrough storytelling from ABC News, National Geographic, ESPN, and it's all designed differently for you to stream straight to any screen whenever you want. Free. ABC News Live. Stream it now or anytime on Roku, Hulu, Facebook, and abcnews.com.
Doctors. Matatas. Ismail? Yes. David.
Over ground zero from Hurricane Michael.
You can see just home after home.
David, nice to meet you.
This was your view.
My favorite view.
Thank you very much.
The world may feel out of your control, but your happiness doesn't have to be. Learn the secrets to happiness. Listen to the 10% Happier podcast, free on Apple Podcasts.
We all need someone who'll pull no punches and give it to us straight. No bull, no spin. Now imagine getting your news like that. Just give it to me straight. ABC News, straightforward.
Well, the attacks over the weekend have given rise to a new term, white terrorism. The former Deputy Attorney General of the United States, Rod Rosenstein, who served in the Trump administration, used it on Twitter. He used it to call out those attacks by white terrorists, saying we need to focus on them as much as we do on Islamic extremism and Islamic terrorists. Today, the president even joined that call in openly calling out white extremism by name. Take a listen.
In one voice, our nation must condemn racism, bigotry, and white supremacy. These sinister ideologies must be defeated. Hate has no place in America. Hatred warps the mind, ravages the heart, and devours the soul. We have asked the FBI to identify all further resources they need to investigate and disrupt hate crimes and domestic terrorism, whatever they need.
And I'm joined now by our Chief Justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas, our senior investigative producer, Mike Levine. Both of you guys cover the FBI. You've been talking here at ABC News for a long time about the threat and how the FBI, Pierre, has been talking about this for a long time. There seems to be this disconnect in this town. The president finally mentioned it today, but there hasn't been a lot of attention paid to this lone extremist, white nationalist threat. It's on the rise.
Well, the FBI has been quietly for months aware of and concerned about the fact that they first were seeing a spike in the number of reports of hate crimes sent to them by local police. There's concern about that. They also are concerned about domestic terrorism, which may involve anti-government, anarchist, environmental crimes, but a significant portion of those domestic terrorism cases involve white supremacists.
So I think you told us before, about 850, the FBI has 850 active investigations right now, potential domestic terror cases. And the most of those, or a third of those, are...
Right. Many of those involve racial hatred, racial animus. And just to give you a sense of how dynamic and dangerous the situation is, just last night the FBI sent out a press statement in which they expressed concern that the two incidents that happened in Dayton and also El Paso could spark further acts of domestic terrorism and or copycats. So this is a real dynamic and dangerous situation. And I think when talking to law enforcement officials, one of the reasons why they're so concerned about white supremacy, if you will, is that the people doing the killing do not see their targets as human beings. If you look at what happened in Charlottesville, if you look at what happened at that Walmart, you know, you're killing people in a way that you have no regard for who they are.
Mike, let's talk a little bit about this manifesto, as the president called it. And to Pierre's point, in this manifesto of the alleged shooter, there's a lot of talk about demonizing the other. Also struck by how many similarities there were to some of the rhetoric and phrases that President Trump himself uses. Things like an invasion of Mexicans. There seemed to be some disturbing common thread there.
Yeah, rhetoric, though, is what presents the issue for federal authorities here. They say they can't investigate rhetoric, right? It's constitutionally protected under the First Amendment. They can't investigate rhetoric. They have to wait until they see signs that someone is trying to move toward violence or trying to inspire someone else toward violence. So that's where this whole controversy about whether we have a domestic terrorism statute or not. We currently do not have one. Federal authorities know they need to do more, but they also know that there are challenges in what they can do. And of course, the First Amendment is sort of the first thing they need to navigate.
And Devin, one thing I would add here is we should be very clear. El Paso, there's every reason to believe that the only reason those people are dead is because they are Hispanic. He talked about it in that screed that he wrote, and apparently, according to our sources, told the authorities once he was arrested that he wanted to kill, quote, as many Mexicans as possible.
It's simply a chilling statement to come out of this investigation in the early stages. Let's bring in Carlos Turin into this conversation. Somebody who's from El Paso, an assistant professor at the University of Texas, El Paso, studies communications. You know, the president today, Carlos, talked about urgent resolve to act, the need to do something here. But he also told our Terry Moran recently that he doesn't see white supremacy as a growing threat. How do you reconcile the president's role in all this and the influence of his rhetoric in all this? Is it having an impact in your view?
Absolutely. I think at best, President Trump's rhetoric is complicit in enabling white supremacy. And at worst, he's giving them a free pass. When he launched his presidential campaign, he said that Mexicans were criminals and rapists. He's consistently talked about the infestation coming from the South as an invasion. This is dehumanizing language that is coming from the most powerful office in the land. And to think that this doesn't have material consequences is just a ridiculous notion.
Pierre, you know, the ABC poll a couple months ago, let's put up the numbers here, most of the American public actually finds that the president's rhetoric is unhelpful. Maybe not directly responsible for an attack like this, as you've told us here in the Bureau. The only person responsible for killing all those people is the shooter. But it's this question of complicity. The Washington Post today took a look at the places that he has had campaign rallies and the rise in hate crimes in those places. It's up 226%.
Well, again, we always have to be careful in assigning specific acts to any political leader. That said, here's the facts that we can go on. When the president was recently having the conversation about the squad and made the comment about going back to their countries, even though they're all Americans, Nazis and some white supremacists were gleeful online. And one of the things that law enforcement officials are pointing to is that there's a very similar phenomenon unfolding where ISIS used to use social media to indoctrinate and radicalize people, and you never have to become a formal member. It's just that the language and the thought process is spread like a virus through the internet. Well, the white supremacists are doing the same thing. And if you look at, for example, this screed written by the suspect in El Paso, it was on the same website that two other mass killers used to spread, their hateful rhetoric.
So it's not, it's certainly maybe not inspired by the president, but emboldened by the president?
Well, One thing, I mean, ABC News last year, I think, here are some facts. ABC News last year did a nationwide study at criminal cases that were actually filed, court documents that you can hold in your hand, trying to find cases where threats or actual attacks, plots, things like that, brought up Trump's name, specifically in terms of inspiration. And we found 17 cases, at least 17 cases, where that was the case. We found no case like that under the Bush administration or the Obama administration.
Certainly worrisome to a lot of people. The president's chief of staff over the weekend sort of saying the president is not a racist, but couldn't clearly answer why he hadn't spoken out more forcefully as other presidents have. In fact, we just heard from the President Trump's predecessor, President Barack Obama, who tweeted a rare public statement on a crisis of this kind, said we should soundly reject language coming out of the mouths of any of our leaders that feeds a climate of fear and hatred or normalizes racist sentiments. He goes on to say leaders who demonize those who don't look like us or suggest that other people, including immigrants, threaten our way of life or refer to other people as subhuman or imply that America belongs to just one certain type of people. It's pretty clear who he's referring to, although it does not mention President Trump by name. Guys, thanks for this conversation. Appreciate it. Mike Levine, Chief Justice Correspondent Pierre Thomas. We continued this conversation a little bit earlier in trying to understand the role of and influence of President Donald Trump with someone who knows him quite well on the other side of the political aisle. Former Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe grew up with President Trump, spent a lot of time on the golf course with him, and also was the governor at the time of the Charlottesville massacre just about 2 years ago. We caught up with Terry McAuliffe a few days ago to ask him about his interactions with President Trump and what insight he might have into why his rhetoric is having this effect. Governor, thanks so much for coming in.
Great to be with you.
So bring us back to that day, August 12th, 2017. You talk to President Trump, you hang up, and you write in the book, in fact, it's the first line of the book, you said you were confident in that moment that he would do the right thing and condemn what happened in your city.
We had a good call.
Why did you think that?
Well, I'd explained to him we had 1,000 neo-Nazis, white supremacists, screaming the most vile things against African Americans, members of the Jewish faith, women. And I said they're just horrible human beings, explained what was going on. He understood, talked to him about a lot of issues as it related to that. And he said, yeah, this is bad, they're bad. And he said, I'm going to do a press conference. I said, you go first, Mr. President. I'll wait for you, of course. And then I hung up the phone, felt he was going to do the right thing. And then half hour and a half, it kept getting pushed back. And we didn't know what was happening. And sure enough, you know what happened. Folks in the White House said, no, Mr. President, no, you're not going to condemn neo-Nazis. You're not going to condemn white supremacists. And he came out and said there were good people on both sides.
He sure did. And that surprised you because you'd known Donald Trump for years.
Yeah.
You've golfed with him.
Yeah.
You spent time with him.
Yep. I knew him when he was a Democrat.
You knew him when he was a Democrat back in the day. I mean, was there ever a moment?
This guy was pro-choice, pro-gay rights. I mean, this whole new thing is a
He
scam.
certainly has turned a page politically. But did you ever think he was a racist? I mean, did you ever have
Not before.
an inkling?
No.
So what do you think changed for him? Why do you think he's made this turn?
I think he has done it in his belief electoral politics, that that is his base. I mean, why is he going after Elijah Cummings? Why is he going after the squad? I think he incorrectly believes that there are more neo-Nazis and white supremacists out there who didn't vote in 2016, and he can burrow them out of their holes and get them to come out and vote.
His aides around him repeatedly tell us, and they've been here in the briefing room, there is not a racist bone in his body. Do you think that can be true and that he can simply be playing this as a strategy?
No.
Walking a fine line?
Yeah, it's a good question, but you can't do and say the things that he does and says and not have some racist tendencies.
All right, thanks to Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe for stopping by the briefing room. We'll be right back.
ABC News, straightforward. This is what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live, the 24/7 streaming news source from ABC News. Breaking news, live events, streaming nonstop. Original breakthrough storytelling from ABC News, National Geographic, ESPN, and it's all designed differently for you to stream straight to any screen whenever you want. Free. ABC News Live. Stream it now or anytime on Roku, Hulu, Facebook, and abcnews.com.
What
you're seeing right now, this is part of the eye wall.
This procession of migrants goes back 2 miles.
There is going to be catastrophic damage.
This fire has made a run. You can see those flames shooting up into the sky.
We are on the jam-packed red carpet.
To the right, guys.
So this is the 4th weekend of protest.
Watch ABC News on location for Facebook Watch.
Sheriff's office! We march together.
The most powerful stories of our time, anytime. Nightline.
Okay, imagine the morning. I'm talking about a good morning. Imagine starting your day off with friends. What's better than that? You know, like the crazy smart friend who always keeps you in the know. The friend with a huge heart and smile who just makes everything better. Imagine hearing from people who open your eyes and your heart. Imagine knowing what's coming next in the day ahead. Well, I get to live this each morning together with you. Imagine that. How blessed am I? And that's what makes it such a good morning, America.
Welcome back here on ABC News Live. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington with some breaking news. The Dow Jones Industrial is down more than 700 points today, almost 3%. You see it there. The market's just closing here at 4 o'clock Eastern time. A significant plunge. One of the worst days on the market here in 2019. Yet that trade war is going to let up. We'll keep an eye on the markets today. Big news for everybody in their 401ks in this ongoing financial battle. Well, here in Washington, we're taking a close look today at the continued fallout from those 2 massacres over the weekend. It's been front page news all across the country this morning from coast to coast. Take a look at some of the headlines that have captured our attention. Some pretty sobering language there, including this one in the New York Post. The president's favorite newspaper, owned by the Murdoch family, ban weapons of war. A pretty stark and urgent message to the president. We didn't hear him talk about guns today when he came out. Also seeing this one from the Dayton Daily News. Dayton, of course, waking up Sunday morning to the loss of 9 lives. This is a Miami Valley tragedy, in big quotes there. Blame the guns. The Chicago Sun-Times, a city which has its own gun violence problem in the inner cities there. And the El Paso Times, hate crime, terror charges. Orlando, the site of the Pulse massacre several years ago, short timeline of violence. And the New York Daily News, God help us. Simple prayer. And the Philly Inquirer, I should say. So we are learning today that hate in America lurks in the hearts and minds of so many people coast to coast, the violence inspired by it touching so many communities. And our next 4 guests all have a firsthand experience with that hate, some with that violence, and all have spent a good bit of time reflecting on what all of us can do to counter it. I want to bring in now Pastor Alvin Edwards of the Mount Zion First African Baptist Church in Charlottesville, Virginia. We just talked to former Governor Terry McAuliffe. Pastor Edwards, thank you so much for coming in. You're also former mayor of Charlottesville back in the day. What do you think when you see what's happened over the weekend? Give us a ray of hope.
Well, I'm a firm believer that when tragedy happens, that there's always hope in the fact that the community can pull together and make a difference and impact the people that are there, as well as this whole country should be there to be supportive of those persons who suffered a great loss. And one of the things I know that we've done here, we have what we call the Clergy Collective that came out a result of what happened in Charleston. And the way it came about is that I called a few pastors together and I asked them the question. I asked them how many of them think I would have called them had that happened here at Mount Zion First African Baptist Church. And the answer was that none of them. And one of the reasons why is because I didn't know them. We live in isolation. We have our own separate churches, and we kind of stay to ourselves. And if we're supposed to impact the community, then we got to impact them together. And so the Charlottesville Clergy Collective is doing, I believe we're doing that.
You're bridging that divide, bringing those people of different faiths together. One of those communities that has always faced a good bit of discrimination and ostracization in this country is the Muslim community. Our next guest was here on the briefing room last week, Rima Ahmad Fadlallah from Dearborn, Michigan, the country's largest Arab American community. Rima is part of the Dearborn Girls podcast. Good to see you, Rima. We've been talking a lot about the discrimination that Muslims face, the fear they face. Give us the sense of your community's reaction from your little slice of America to what happened overnight, and how do you find hope in responding to these tragedies?
So when we hear events like this, I would say on an individual level, and I think this also resonates with many members of my community as well, we are afraid. We know that we, in many ways, as individuals and as a community at large, have a target sign on us. And oftentimes we start thinking about how unfortunate it is that these events are happening, and in many ways condemned in the language of how political conversations happen in our nation, but we also wonder what implications this has on us uniquely as a community. And to answer the second part of your question, similar to conversations that we had earlier this week, I think the ways that we cope is by creating this insular environment. I think that a lot of times people see insular environments in communities like ours, like the Black community, like the Jewish community, and they feel like we are being exclusive. That's something that we've been accused of many times. But I think the question that I would ask those people is, why do we feel the need to be exclusive? Why do we, and I don't think exclusive is even the right word. I think, again, insular, a word that I like to use is we're cocooning. You know, we're kind of staying together and building with each other because we are afraid of the misunderstandings, the hatred, the fear that exists outside of those four walls. And we know that the only things that we really can control is what happens within our communities themselves.
And Rima, when you come face to face with hate, whether it's someone in line at the grocery store, whether it's online in a tweet at you, whether it's, God forbid, a tragedy like we saw in the Walmart in Texas, how do you respond? How should you respond? What's the secret there that you've learned from experience?
I don't know that there's a should you respond or secret. I think that a lot of times when you're feeling hatred spewed at you, it's really, you feel cornered. It's really hard to know how you should respond. I can only speak on behalf of myself. I actually was en route back to Detroit this past week, and I was in line at security, and that's, just given my last name and, my family's history, there have been moments where I do feel kind of tense in those moments at airport security, being a Muslim woman. And a woman behind me, a white woman behind me, was upset that they didn't make me take my jacket off, or my jean jacket off going through security. And she said in front of my face, "You're not going to make her take that off, so much for keeping us safe." And I don't know that there's a how should you respond in that moment, because I do think there's room to have a conversation with that person or want to defend yourself. Personally, for my own peace of mind, I just put my headphones back on and ignored her. People have their different ways of coping with those moments. I think the bigger question that I would like to see asked more often is, why do people still feel entitled to treating other people that way? And if I were asked that question, I think we aren't having the right conversations in this country around empathy. You don't need to personally know somebody or have someone as in your friend group who's different than you, or in your family, for you to empathize with those different communities. And I think that situations like this week happen because people feel as though the only times they empathize with other communities is if they personally have a dog in the fight. And that's a huge problem.
That's a great observation. Rima Ahmad Fadlallah from the Dearborn Girls podcast. Thanks, Rima, for joining us. Let's go now out to Pittsburgh, which suffered a tragedy back in 2018, October 2018, at the Tree of Life Synagogue. Rabbi Ron Simmons joins us. He has been a guest here before. Ron, it's good to see you. Let's pick it up where Rima left off there. How do you spread empathy?
Well, let me begin by saying to you, Rima, that is atrocious, and I'm so sorry that happened to you in 21st century America. What you talk about is how it is that we don't need to know someone in order to have empathy for them. So that's exactly what we're doing here at the JCC, the Jewish Community Center for Loving Kindness. We're redefining neighbor from a geographic term to a moral concept. From a geographic term to a moral concept. That is to say that I don't need to know you in order to have empathy for you, in order to feel like your experience is a part of the larger human experience and we are connected in that way. I don't need to know anyone who has suffered, is suffering in El Paso, in Dayton, in any one of a number of other places where pain and hatred, right, are going hand in hand. What I need to do, what we need to do, is to appreciate the fact that when you go back to the longest held values that we have, love your neighbor as yourself, and do not stand idle while your neighbor bleeds, that these are not just some trite standards that come from the ancient world, from Scripture, but that these are standards that actually should guide every aspect of the work that we do and the way that we interact with people. Our goal is to look at our neighbor and to say, you are a mirror image of me. And what happens to you happens to me. And I'm going to try to lift you up and be an upstander in ways that you probably didn't imagine someone who you thought was a stranger could do, but that we are not strangers, we are neighbors.
Pastor Edwards, back to you over in Charlottesville. I wonder if some of the lessons that Rabbi Ron was talking about have been learned and carried through in Charlottesville. Do you get the sense, nearly 2 years on now, from that horrible day when Heather Hare lost her life, has the community rebounded? Are they stronger? Have those lessons been absorbed?
I believe we're stronger. We're getting ready to have Unity Day this week, and and we call it Unity Day. And one of the things that happened last year and will happen again this year, we will have what we call the Sing Out. It's people who come for rehearse on one day for a couple of hours, and then we'll sing in the evening. It brings people from all across the community, whether they can sing or not sing well, but we get together, we sing, we harmonize, and we meet people. You bridge the gap. You learn, you meet new people, and you share with new people, and you talk to new people.
And Brandon Wolf joins us now from Orlando, Florida, going full circle here on just the number of major cities and communities that have been touched by this gun violence and hatred problem. Brandon, it's great to see you. You survived the massacre at the Pulse nightclub, simply a horrific scene. Back in 2016, 49 people killed there. First of all, how are you doing? How are you healing? How's the community doing? And what's your message for all of us today?
Yeah, well, obviously it's very challenging. Thank you for having me on. It was a rough weekend. You know, the first time I heard about what happened in El Paso, I was scrolling through my social media feed and I saw that video of police escorting folks out of a department store in the mall, and it was strikingly familiar. It was hands up, keep moving, police officers with long guns, but that's not what struck me about that video. What struck me was that there were children being ushered out of that department store. What strikes me is that there are children being murdered every single day in this country. And that's what keeps me up at night. What keeps me up at night is those kids will never be able to go to a grocery store again without looking for the exit. They're going to live the rest of their lives with anxiety and PTSD, and that's a crime. That is a crime in this country. I would say that our community is broken, as it is every time this happens. And the message to both communities is take the time to grieve. Take what you need. We're here for you. But the message to the rest of the country is that we can sit around talking about the same things, the same solutions we've talked about for 25 years, or we can face the harsh reality that there will be no legislative change until we change our legislators. It's time to get rid of the pathetic and spineless lawmakers who have done nothing on this issue for decades.
Very well said, Brandon. Thank you. We're just about out of time, but I do want to do one quick round with all three of our remaining guests, just on the one takeaway that our viewers on Facebook, Roku, Hulu, Facebook Watch, the ABC News app. We have quite a young, plugged-in audience here on ABC News Live. What's the one thing we can all take away and do to make the world a better place today, in your view, Pastor Edwards?
Well, one of the things, you love your neighbor, and you be there for them.
Rabbi Ron?
Don't wait for someone else to be an upstander. Be the upstander yourself, not just in times of tragedy, but even at times when someone just needs an extra little bit of help.
Be the upstander. I like that one. Brandon, final words from you?
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, a man in Dayton, Ohio was able to kill 9 people and injure 26 more in less than 30 seconds. We need to demand that our legislators get back to Washington, D.C. and get back to working to protect us.
All right, well said, all three of our guests, Pastor Alvin Edwards, Rabbi Ron Simmons from Pittsburgh, Brandon Wolf, survivor of the Pulse Massacre in Orlando. Thank you so much, all of you, and good luck to all of you as well. Thanks so much. We'll be back with a conversation picking up on what Brandon alluded to there. What sort of solutions can this town, can Washington, and our local communities come up with after this?
ABC News, straightforward. This is what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live, the 24/7 streaming news source from ABC News. Breaking news, live events, streaming nonstop. Original breakthrough storytelling from ABC News, National Geographic, ESPN, and it's all designed differently for you to stream straight to any screen whenever you want. Free. ABC News Live. Stream it now or anytime on Roku, Hulu, Facebook, and abcnews.com.
What you're seeing right now, this is part of the eye wall.
This procession of migrants goes back 2 miles.
There is going to be catastrophic damage.
This fire has made a run. You can see those flames shooting up into the sky.
We are on the jam-packed red carpet.
To the right, guys.
So this is the 4th weekend of protest.
Watch ABC News on location for Facebook Watch.
Sheriff's office! We march together.
The most powerful stories of our time, anytime. Nightline.
Okay, imagine the morning. I'm talking about a good morning. Imagine starting your day off with friends. What's better than that? You know, like the crazy smart friend who always keeps you in the know. The friend with a huge heart and smile who just makes everything better. Imagine hearing from people who open your eyes and your heart. Imagine knowing what's coming next in the day ahead. Well, I get to live this each morning together with you. Imagine that. How blessed am I? And that's what makes it such a good morning, America.
Well, if the frequency of these violent mass shootings seems to be getting worse, you're not just imagining it. Take a look at these numbers from the Gun Violence Archive, which tracks the data here in the United States. There have been 251 mass shootings just in the past 216 days alone. On average, that's one about every 12 days so far this year, counting just the 2019 mass shootings. An incredible number. Begs the question, what can our lawmakers, our policymakers, state and local governments do about it? Joined for that conversation by our Capitol Hill reporter Ben Siegel, our Justice reporter Alex Mallon, also joined from New York by our investigative and justice reporter Josh Margolin. Guys, thanks for coming in for this conversation. I want to start with you, Ben, because there's been so much focus on Congress here. The president today said he's been hard at work with Congress on this. There have been several bills passed out of the Democratic-led House of Representatives, but everything just seems sort of stalled right now. The low-hanging fruit is background checks.
Sure. And also, Congress isn't here. They're in the middle of a recess for the month of August, and there's some discussion now. Members are at home, turning on their TVs, some of them seeing this horrific, these attacks for the first time. They want to do something. There's some conversation about bringing some of the members back here early. There's a push to push Mitch McConnell, the Senate Republican Majority Leader, to bring the Senate back to vote on some of these bills. The House passed 2 background bills in February in response to some of these shootings in the past. Those have still not gotten a vote in the Senate. A lot of pressure from Democrats to McConnell to get him to take those up.
The Republican leader, who we should say is at home with a broken shoulder, he's not jumping to come back to town. It's sort of the graveyard, as Democrats call them. Those bills are stuck there. Is there any chance that that's going to move, and any chance that they're going to come back?
I think it's unclear. There's actually also pressure, we should say, in the House as well. There are some progressives who want, even though the House has already acted on these bills, they want to see more. They want the House to take up an assault weapons weapons ban potentially, bring back the House Judiciary Committee, which has jurisdiction over gun control and some of that policy, to maybe take some other action. It looks like that's not happening right now, but there's still plenty of time for all of this to change.
Alex, the president today said he instructed the Attorney General, Bill Barr, to investigate these shootings to find some sort of a way to curb the violence here. He was sort of strikingly vague in what exactly he was asking the Attorney General to do and what he can actually do through executive action on this. Any clarity?
I think his most specific direction that we heard from him is that he wants the Attorney General and the Justice Department to come up with a bill that they could present to Congress that would quicken the way that mass shooters are put on death row and put to death. I mean, so it's very characteristic of what we'd heard him say in the past. And actually, just last month, we saw Attorney General Barr come out and say that the Justice Department was going to resume federal death penalties. But I think that aside from that, I think that what you'll see is, again, along with what the president was saying, you'll see the Justice Department reach out to tech companies, see if there's any way that they can better coordinate with tech companies to identify those dark websites like 8chan, where this shooter and the Christchurch massacre shooter posted those manifesto screeds of theirs. I think that they're going to really effort on trying to tighten that coordination up. But it also raises a bunch of First Amendment issues, as Mike Levine kind of brought up earlier. And when he says that we're going to, I'm instructing the DOJ and the FBI to better figure out how they're going to target these domestic terrorists when there is no domestic terrorism statute. That's going to, again, be in the hands of Congress to pass a law that makes domestic terrorism a federal crime.
Let's zero in a little bit on those message boards. I think our viewers, some of you may be familiar with it, but Josh Margolin certainly is and can lay this out for us. Josh, this online messaging board, 8chan, is in the spotlight in this latest tragedy. It sort of is more often in the margins of the interwebs than a Facebook or Twitter, but also a place where a lot of this hate breathes. Tell us what it is and what happened today with that website.
Well, what happened today, to go backwards, what happened today was that the service that hosts 8chan decided they won't host 8chan anymore. So basically 8chan is now offline. But we've seen that before. A number of years ago, the Daily Stormer website, which is a neo-Nazi white supremacist website, their host took them off the internet. They returned. This happens. That's really not the solution. And frankly, the root of the problem here is not that the message is getting out. It's that the message is being built up among these people who are somehow disaffected, prone to violence, and may have some sort of socializing or socialization or psychiatric issues. There's another issue here that the president didn't touch on, and maybe the Attorney General will look at this when he does his review. Federal law enforcement can do a lot more. They probably need a lot more in the way of resources, but we saw this with the Parkland massacre. In that case, the FBI was tipped off in advance, and local law enforcement was tipped off in advance, and that incident really was a breakdown in communication and missed signals. These two shootings this weekend may have been different when ultimately the investigations are done, but certainly in the space before you get into an issue about the First Amendment, there is a lot more that the federal government can do. But the key here is that the federal government needs to want to do it. As long as people in Congress or in the political world believe that they don't want to go after groups that push out these hateful messages because they feel that those groups might form some portion of their support, you're never going to have the ability for the DOJ or Homeland Security or the FBI to act.
Yeah, a lot of concern about civil liberties, about surveillance of some of these fringe groups, for sure. We know there are members on Capitol Hill, certainly members of this administration, that feel strongly about that, Josh. But just to put a finer point on what you're saying that law enforcement you talk to suggests that perhaps one avenue to more aggressively going after incidents like these potential shooters is to more aggressively police those spaces.
Sure.
Those dark interwebs.
Sure. And I'll give you one good example that's spoken about among federal law enforcement a lot right now. So we all know about a system called Data Miner. And Data Miner, for anybody that's not familiar with it, is basically a system that combs through Twitter, finds things that are new, and then sends out alerts saying to whoever, news organizations, whoever's out there, that this kind of discussion is, some sort of discussion is happening on Twitter. Those are aggregation services. Right now, the social media companies do not allow law enforcement to use aggregation services. And if they find out that law enforcement is using them covertly, they will then ban the law enforcement agencies from using them. So the law enforcement leadership in this country is saying to Silicon Valley that that is an unfair tying of their hands, that if the stuff is out there on the public internet, that law enforcement should be able to have access to it. That's a discussion that law enforcement would like to have right now.
Josh, thanks. Let's bring somebody else into the conversation now. Allison Anderman with the Giffords Law Center, senior counsel at Giffords. Allison, great to see you. You know, in the absence of action by the federal government in this town, a number of states are certainly taking steps on their own, including states like California really has become a model. Tell us about what California is doing and the success they're having when it comes to mental health, gun safety, and preventing tragedies like this. We should say, even though there was just that horrible incident a couple weeks ago in Gilroy, California.
Yes, and I think it's worth noting that the guns in the Gilroy shooting came from Nevada, a bordering state that has much weaker laws than California. And while we have a patchwork system of state laws and no comprehensive, strong federal laws, there will always be opportunities to slip through the cracks. But yes, California is a leader on this issue. Over the last approximately 3 decades, California has passed dozens of laws that have had a dramatic effect on its gun death rate. In fact, in the last about 26 years, California's gun death rate has plummeted about 60%, which is nearly 3 times faster than the national gun death rate, which has also fallen. And California now has the 7th lowest gun death rate in the nation.
Any immediate prescriptions you see just in this early stage, Allison, out of these 2 shootings for sort of low-hanging fruit that other states can steps other states can take to replicate California's success?
Absolutely. Well, the lowest hanging fruit and the most basic of gun laws is background checks, ensuring that when a person buys a firearm, which is a weapon designed to take human life, that he or she is subject to a background check. Otherwise, it's far too easy for dangerous people and criminals to get their hands on guns. So that is certainly a first step. The other very important thing that these states could do is enact extreme risk protection order laws, which are laws that allow concerned family members or law enforcement officers who are noticing signs that a person is in crisis and may be about to harm themselves or others to go to court and get an order that takes guns away temporarily from this person while they get treatment.
Yeah, the red flag laws, the president expressed support for that as well. A lot of support for some of these ideas. We'll have to see if lawmakers, either at the state level and the federal level, can come together in that. Allison Anderman with the Giffords Law Center, thank you for that. And finally, Josh Margolin, back to you in New York. You're getting some breaking reporting now out of El Paso, Texas, before we close the show here on what the suspect in that city did before he launched the shooting.
Yeah, it seems, Devin, that he was really very methodical. And he went to El Paso, obviously after a long drive. He was looking for a place to shoot. He goes to the Walmart. He realizes he walks in without any weapons, just trying to case the place, apparently. He realizes that's a place that has a lot of people that he would like to target. He then goes back, he arms, and comes back in shooting.
All right, Josh Margolin, thanks for that reporting. Much more from Josh and the entire team on abcnews.com. Coming up on World News Tonight with David Muir as well. That'll air here on ABC News Live in World News Prime at 8:30. Our thanks to Alex Mellon, Ben Siegel here with us. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Thanks for joining us. Back here tomorrow at 3:30 Eastern Time in the briefing room. For now, we'll leave you with some of the powerful images of the past 2 days.
That saved a wretch like me. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. My chains are gone, set free. My God, my Savior has ransomed me, and like a flood his mercy raised.